Alex, the board members are waiting in the conference room. His assistant's voice filtered through the discreet intercom, professional and polished. I'll be there in a moment, Sarah. He didn't turn from the window. Below him, thousands of lives pulsed in synchronized chaos. Yellow cabs weaving through arteries of asphalt, pedestrians flowing like blood cells through concrete veins. He owned pieces of that world. His name adorned buildings. His face graced magazine covers quarterly. And yet, as he watched a lone figure pause on a distant street corner to tie a shoelace, something hollow echoed inside his chest. Later that evening, after signing merger documents that would add $300 million to his net worth, Alexander found himself in his private study, a room lined with first editions he'd never read and awards he no longer remembered earning. His phone buzzed. A text from Clara illuminated the screen. Sophia drew a picture of our family today. She insisted on giving you the biggest smile. I've left it on your desk. He picked up the crayon drawing immediately, his thumb tracing the wobbly lines of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. Sophia had indeed drawn him with an enormous, toothy grin. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Hey! Clara's voice came softly from the doorway. She stood there in simple jeans and a faded sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, no pretense. After 12 years of marriage, she still moved through their home with a quiet grace that made the opulence around her seem almost vulgar by comparison. You're home early. The deal closed faster than expected. He gestured to the drawing. She's talented. She missed you at dinner. Asked where Daddy's important meetings were tonight. Clara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face with that unnerving perceptiveness she'd always possessed. You look tired, Alex. I'm fine. He set the drawing down carefully, as if it might crumble. Just thinking. About what? He almost told her then. The truth hovered at the edge of his tongue. The gnawing sensation that despite having everything the world told him to want, he felt like an imposter in his own life. That when he looked in the mirror these days, he saw a beautifully packaged emptiness staring back. But the words dissolved before they could form. How could he explain to this woman, who'd held his hand through his first startup failure, who'd nursed him through pneumonia when he was too proud to see a doctor, who'd built a sanctuary of warmth in every home they'd shared, that he felt nothing when he should feel everything? About expansion into Asian markets, he lied smoothly, the corporate jargon rolling off his tongue like a well-rehearsed script. The time zones are complicated. Clara studied him for a long moment, her gaze softening with something that might have been pity or understanding. He couldn't bear to decipher which. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. You don't have to carry it all alone, you know. That's what I'm here for. Her touch should have anchored him. Instead, it made him feel more adrift. Because her faith in him felt like a weight. The expectation that he should be content, should be grateful, should recognize the treasure he possessed. And he did recognize it. God, he did. But recognition wasn't the same as feeling. And lately, he felt nothing but a quiet desperation to feel something, anything real. I know, he murmured, pulling her gently into an embrace. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender shampoo and home. For 3 heartbeats, the hollow space inside him quieted. Then it returned, louder this time, whispering that this comfort was precisely the problem. A beautiful cage of predictability when he craved the electric shock of being truly seen. Later, as Clara slept peacefully beside him, Alexander slipped from bed and stood once more at the window. The city never slept. Neither did the hunger inside him. Somewhere out there, he believed, existed a version of himself that wouldn't feel this quiet despair in the midst of everything he'd supposedly wanted. Somewhere out there waited validation that wouldn't feel like obligation, admiration that spaces. The gentle curve of her smile when she listened, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when Sophia told her a joke only a 4-year-old would find hilarious, the steady warmth in her hands as she kneaded dough for the sourdough bread Alexander claimed was the only thing that made business trips bearable. Mommy, look. I made the syrup river, Sophia announced, proudly dragging a zigzagging line of amber across her plate. Clara knelt beside the small chair, her worn cotton dress brushing the floorboards. What a magnificent river. Does it lead to the chocolate chip mountains? To the whipped cream clouds? Sophia corrected with solemn authority, pointing her syrup-drenched fork upward. A soft chuckle came from the doorway. Alexander stood there, still in his pajamas, the sharp edges of his corporate armor softened by sleep. For a fleeting moment, the hollow ache that had haunted him the previous night vanished, replaced by something tender and real. "Clouds it is," he said, ruffling Sophia's sleep-mussed hair before turning to Clara. "You're up early. The bakery delivery came at 6. Mrs. Gable's hip is bothering her again, so I told her I'd cover the morning shift at the community center." She rose smoothly, pressing a kiss to his stubbled cheek. Her lips lingered a second longer than necessary, a quiet offering of connection. "I saved you the last almond croissant. Still warm." He watched her move to the counter, her movements economical and graceful. This was the woman who'd sold her grandmother's pearl necklace to fund his first server rack when investors called his AI concept quixotic. The woman who'd sat with him on their fire escape at 3 a.m. after his father's funeral, saying nothing, just holding his hand until the sky lightened. The woman who remembered how he took his coffee, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, without being asked for a decade. "Why do you do it?" he asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could cage it. Clara turned, a mixing bowl cradled in her arms. "Do what, love?" "All of this." He gestured vaguely at the sunlit kitchen, the carefully arranged fruit, the steam rising from the coffee carafe. "You could have your own gallery by now. Your paintings. Clara, you're brilliant. Yet you're here arranging strawberries at 7 in the morning." Her smile didn't falter, but something deeper shifted in her eyes. A quiet understanding that went beyond words. She set the bowl down and crossed to him, her hands finding his. Her fingers were dusted with flour, cool against his skin. "Because this isn't all of this, Alex. This is the foundation." She squeezed gently. "When you're negotiating billion-dollar deals, you need to know there's a place where syrup rivers flow to whipped cream clouds. When the world sees Alexander Vance, tech titan, I get to see the man who cries at dog rescue commercials and burns toast every single time he tries to make it himself." Her thumb stroked his knuckles. "My art isn't in galleries. It's right here, in the way Sophia's eyes light up when she sees her daddy walk through that door. In the peace on your face when you finally relax enough to sleep through the night. That's my masterpiece." He swallowed hard, the corporate persona cracking at the edges. What if I'm not enough for you? What if you're settling?" Clara's laugh was soft, tinged with wonder. "Settling?" She cupped his face, her flour-dusted thumb brushing his cheekbone. "My love, I didn't choose you despite your ambition. I chose you with it. I don't want to clip your wings. I want to be the sky you fly through." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You think I don't see the weight you carry? The way you stare at the ceiling sometimes, wondering if any of it matters? I see it all. And I stay, not because I have to, but because I want to. Every single day." From her high chair, Sophia piped up, syrup glistening on her chin. "Daddy, Mommy says you're her favorite adventure." The words landed in Alexander's chest like a physical blow. He pulled Clara close, burying his face in her shoulder, breathing in the scent of flower and lavender and home. In that embrace, the hunger for something more quieted. Not because it was satisfied, but because in this moment, he was reminded of what he already possessed. A treasure he'd begun to mistake for scenery. Later, as he dressed for work, Clara entered their bedroom carrying his favorite navy tie. Without a word, she stood before him and began to knot it with practiced fingers, her movements intimate and familiar. Her eyes held his in the mirror's reflection. "Tonight," she said softly, "let's watch that documentary about the Northern Lights. Sophia can stay up past 8. We'll make popcorn with too much butter." He nodded, his throat tight. As she finished the knot and smoothed the silk against his collar, her fingers lingered at the base of his throat, a silent promise, a quiet anchor. "I love you," he whispered, the words feeling both insufficient and essential. Clara's smile reached her eyes, those warm hazel pools that had witnessed his every triumph and failure. "I know," she said simply. "Now go change the world. But remember, you already changed mine." He left the penthouse that morning feeling, for the first time in months, like he was walking toward something rather than running from it. He didn't see the way Clara's smile faded the moment the elevator doors closed, how she sank onto the edge of their bed and pressed her palm against her sternum as if to steady a sudden flutter there. He didn't notice the single tear she wiped away before turning to Sophia with renewed brightness, because Clara had mastered the art of holding space for his fragility without ever revealing her own. She believed love meant being the steady shore against which his storms could break. She never imagined that one day he would mistake her constancy for complacency and walk away from the very harbor that kept him from drowning. The tragedy wasn't that he failed to see her worth. It was that he saw it perfectly, and in his hunger for validation, convinced himself that something so freely given couldn't possibly be valuable. And in that fatal miscalculation, he would soon trade a lifetime of quiet devotion for the glittering mirage of a love that demanded nothing but his wildflowers in a mason jar, candles flickering despite the lingering daylight. Sophia sat perched on a booster seat, legs swinging rhythmically as she carefully arranged peas into a smiley face on her plate. "Look, Daddy, my dinner's happy," she announced as Alexander stepped through the front door, the tension of boardrooms and market fluctuations still clinging to his shoulders like static. He paused in the doorway, briefcase dangling from his fingers. The sight before him, the warm light catching the gold in Clara's hair as she ladled soup into bowls, Sophia's unrestrained joy, the scent of rosemary and home, hit him with physical force. For 3 breaths, the corporate armor dissolved completely. "Is that my happy dinner?" he asked, crossing the room to press a kiss to Sophia's crown before turning to Clara. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "God, it smells incredible in here." Clara leaned back into him, her hand covering his where it rested against her stomach. Sophia helped chop the carrots. Mostly she made confetti of them, but she tried. "I did the big ones," Sophia insisted, holding up a thumb and forefinger spaced dramatically apart. "The tiny ones were too shy." Alexander laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise even him. He took his seat between them, and as Clara served the soup, their fingers brushed. A lifetime of shared moments lived in that touch. The night he'd proposed on a rain-soaked Brooklyn fire escape, the hospital room where they'd first held Sophia, the quiet mornings when words weren't necessary. "Tell Daddy about your drawing today," Clara prompted gently, nudging Sophia's shoulder. Sophia's eyes widened with importance. "I drew our family at the park, and I gave Mommy extra long hair because she's a princess. And you have super muscles, Daddy, 'cause you carry me on your shoulders." Alexander's throat tightened. "Did you give me a cool superhero cape?" "Nope," she said solemnly. "You don't need one. Your hugs are stronger." The simplicity of her faith undid him. He reached across the table, his large hand engulfing her small one. "You're right. Hugs are the best superpower." Clara watched them, her heart expanding until it ached. She caught Alexander's gaze and held it, a silent conversation passing between them. "This," her eyes said, "this is what matters." And for a moment his answered back, "I know. I see it. I'm here." Later, during Sophia's bath time, Alexander rolled up his sleeves and knelt beside the tub while Clara folded laundry nearby. Bubbles floated through the steamy air as Sophia directed an elaborate soap opera starring rubber ducks. "The green duck is sad because he lost his family," she narrated, making the yellow duck quack sympathetically. "But the blue duck says, 'Don't worry, we'll be your new family.'" Alexander's hands stilled in the water. He looked up at Clara, his eyes glistening. "Where does she come up with this stuff?" Clara folded a tiny sock, her voice soft. "She's learning about love from watching us." The words hung between them, profound in their simplicity. Alexander returned his attention to Sophia, gently pouring water over her shoulders. "And what does the green duck say back?" Sophia considered this gravely. "He says, 'Love isn't about who you start with. It's about who stays.'" The profundity from such a small mouth silenced the room. Alexander swallowed hard, lifting Sophia into a towel and wrapping her snugly. As he carried her to bed, her damp head resting against his shoulder, she whispered, "Daddy, will you always stay?" His steps faltered almost imperceptibly. "Always, my love. Always." But in the quiet of the hallway after tucking her in, after kissing her forehead for the 3rd time because neither of them wanted the moment to end, Alexander felt the old hunger stir. Not for glamour or validation, but for certainty. The terrifying weight of that always settled on his shoulders. Could he truly be enough for this perfect world they'd built? Or was he destined to disappoint them both? Clara found him standing in the darkened living room, moonlight painting silver stripes across the floor. She slipped her hand into his without a word. "She asked if I'd always stay," he murmured, the confession raw. Clara leaned her head against his arm. "And what did you say?" "I said yes." His voice cracked. "But what if I can't keep that promise?" She turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. Her thumbs stroked his cheekbones, wiping away tears he hadn't realized had fallen. "Alex, love isn't a promise to never fail. It's a promise to always come back. To choose us again and again, even on the hard days." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. Present. Real." He pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. "I'm so afraid of losing this." "You won't lose it unless you stop fighting for it," she whispered into his hair. "And I'll be right here fighting beside you." They stood like that for long minutes, the house breathing softly around them. Sophia's gentle snores from down the hall, the refrigerator's hum, the distant city sounds muffled by double-paned glass. In that suspended moment, Alexander truly believed he could build a fortress around this love, protect it from the emptiness that sometimes whispered in his ear during board meetings and black-tie galas. What he couldn't know, what neither of them could sense in that tender darkness, was how fragile even the strongest foundations could be when tested by a hunger that mistakes novelty for salvation. How the very constancy that made their love a sanctuary would soon be misread as stagnation by a man who'd forgotten that diamonds form under pressure, not in the glittering surface of shallow waters. And how, in just a few short months, he would stand in this same living room packing a suitcase while Sophia slept down the hall, believing he was chasing something more, when all along, he was walking away from the only thing that had ever made him feel truly rich. The tragedy wasn't that he didn't love them. It was that he loved them so imperfectly, and in his fear of inadequacy, would choose the illusion of being desired over the reality of being cherished. But tonight, none of that existed yet. Tonight, there was only this, the weight of his dogged-practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, yet his mind remained anchored in the warm kitchen of hours earlier. Sophia's syrup river, Clara's flour-dusted hands, the weight of his daughter's trustful head against his shoulder. He accepted a champagne flute from a passing server, the bubbles sharp against his tongue, but the taste felt artificial compared to Clara's chamomile tea. "You're Alexander Vance." The voice arrived like a struck chord, low, melodic, edged with something that felt dangerously close to recognition. The man who made algorithms feel human. He turned to find a woman whose presence seemed to bend the light around her. Valeria Moreau stood perhaps 5'10" in heels that gleamed like liquid obsidian, her gown a cascade of emerald silk that caught the torchlight as she shifted. At 29, her beauty was a carefully curated weapon. High cheekbones sculpted by genetics and privilege, eyes the color of dark honey that held his gaze without blinking, lips curved in an expression that suggested she already knew secrets he hadn't yet confessed. "I'm flattered you've heard of me," he replied, the corporate mask sliding into place automatically. "Heard of you?" She laughed, a sound like crystal bells, perfectly pitched. "Darling, I've studied you. Your keynote at Web Summit last year? I watched it 3 times. The way you spoke about vulnerability in AI design." She leaned closer, the scent of night-blooming jasmine enveloping him. "You weren't selling software. You were confessing." Her words landed with unnerving precision. No one spoke to him like this. Not investors, not board members, certainly not the sycophants who populated these events. They saw the empire. She claimed to see the architect's hands trembling beneath the blueprint. "Impressive memory," he said, though his pulse had quickened. "Most people just remember the stock price. Stock prices are boring." Her fingers brushed his sleeve, accidental or intentional, he couldn't tell. But the man who builds cathedrals of code while carrying that quiet sadness in his eyes? That's fascinating. The observation struck like a physical blow. He forced a smile. "You're perceptive." "I'm observant." She gestured toward the museum's reflecting pool, where their distorted reflections shimmered on black water. "Shall we? Away from all these people who want pieces of you." They walked in silence for a moment, the ancient Egyptian stones cool beneath their feet. Alexander found himself cataloging details with alarming speed. The precise arch of her eyebrow, the way her gown whispered against her calves, the unshakable confidence in her posture. It was magnetic, dangerous. "You have a family, don't you?" she asked suddenly, not unkindly. "I saw the profile piece in Forbes. Wife, daughter, a perfect little ecosystem." "Clara and Sophia," he said, the names feeling sacred on his tongue. "Yes." Valeria stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Moonlight caught the gold flecks in her eyes. "Tell me something no journalist knows. Something real." The request disarmed him completely. He thought of Clara's hands kneading dough that morning, of Sophia's belief that hugs were stronger than capes. But those truths felt too fragile to offer this woman who moved through the world like a force of nature. "I sometimes forget my own daughter's age," he admitted, the confession raw. "Last week I told a colleague she was 6. She's 4. I was in Tokyo for 72 hours straight closing a deal, and when I came home, the disconnect was so jarring I couldn't place her in time. Valeria didn't offer the expected sympathy. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed a hypothesis. "You're building monuments while missing the foundation," she said softly. "How exhausting that must be." The words resonated in places he kept locked. He opened his mouth to defend his choices, to explain the necessity of his ambition, but found himself unable to form the sentences, because part of him wondered if she was right. "My life isn't limited," he said finally, the protest sounding weak even to his own ears. "Of course it isn't," she agreed smoothly, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. The contact sent an electric jolt up his arm. "But comfort has a way of narrowing our vision. You've built this beautiful, safe world with your Clara, this warm little nest." She said Clara's name without malice, yet it landed like a diminishment. "But have you ever wondered what you might become if you weren't constantly folding yourself into the shape of husband and father?" The question hung between them, poisonous and seductive. Alexander thought of Clara's words from that morning. "I want to be the sky you fly through." But Valeria was offering him wings. New, untested, glittering wings that promised flight without the weight of gravity. "I should get back to the reception," he murmured, though his feet remained rooted. Valeria smiled, a slow unfolding of lips that promised secrets. She withdrew a sleek black card from her clutch, pressing it into his palm. Her fingers lingered a heartbeat too long. "When you're tired of being the man everyone expects you to be, call me. I'll show you the Alexander Vance the world hasn't met yet." She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "Oh, and tell Sophia her daddy has the most interesting eyes I've ever seen. The kind that hold entire galaxies. She should be proud." The specificity of the detail, the use of Sophia's name, the poetic description of his eyes, unraveled him completely. How could she know to say exactly what would pierce his armor? He watched her disappear into the crowd, a ripple of emerald silk parting the sea of black ties and glittering gowns. Later, in the back seat of his town car, Alexander stared at the black card in his hand. No name, no title, just a phone number embossed in silver foil. Rain began to streak the windows, distorting the city lights into liquid gold. He thought of Clara waiting up for him, probably curled on the sofa with a book, the television muted. He thought of Sophia asleep down the hall, her small chest rising and falling in the dark. And he thought of Valeria's words, "What you might become." The town car glided through Manhattan's canyons, each passing block a choice point. Turn left toward the bridge that would take him home to warmth and constancy. Turn right toward the glittering towers where possibility whispered in jasmine-scented darkness. His thumb hovered over his phone screen. Clara's contact photo smiling up at him. Her face relaxed in a moment of unguarded joy he'd captured one Sunday morning. He didn't call her. Not yet. Instead, he slipped Valeria's card into his wallet, tucking it behind his driver's license. Behind the photo of Sophia grinning toothlessly on her first birthday. The gesture felt like a betrayal even as he performed it. Or perhaps it felt like hope. In that suspended moment between gala and home, between duty and desire, Alexander Vance made the first quiet decision that would fracture his world. He allowed himself to wonder what lay beyond the horizon of his perfectly constructed life. And in that wondering, he failed to see the most dangerous truth of all, that the emptiness he sought to fill wasn't in his marriage, but in the mirror he avoided each morning. Valeria hadn't created his hunger. She had simply handed him a menu of distractions, and he was already reading the descriptions with ravenous eyes. The real tragedy hadn't begun yet. It was still gathering it sometimes mistook for thunder and hid under her blankets. Clara noticed the absences first. The way he no longer asked about her pottery class, how he forgot Sophia's school play was Thursday, not Friday. The hollow space growing between them in bed where his body used to curve around hers like a question mark seeking its answer. She tried filling the silence with gentle persistence, leaving his favorite cookies on his desk, scheduling family movie nights, holding his hand during Sophia's bedtime stories. But her love became a language he'd stopped understanding. He'd smile absently, kiss her forehead, and retreat behind the glowing screen of his phone, where Valeria's messages bloomed like night flowers. You deserve to be seen. Not just as a provider, as a man. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday evening in late October. Rain lashed against the penthouse windows as Sophia built a blanket fort in the living room, her small voice narrating an adventure for her stuffed animals. Clara moved through the kitchen preparing soup, the rhythmic chop of carrots a meditation against the unease coiling in her stomach. Alexander stood by the window, watching the storm, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. Alex. Clara's voice was soft, tested by months of walking on eggshells. Sophia wants you to be the dragon in her fort. She made you a crown out of paper plates. He didn't turn. I can't tonight. She's been waiting all day. She drew you a map to the treasure. Clara. He finally faced her, and the raw panic in his eyes stole her breath. We need to talk. Sophia chose that moment to burst into the kitchen, crown askew, arms outstretched. Daddy. The dragon needs to roar. She launched herself toward him. Alexander caught her midair, but didn't lift her onto his shoulders as he always had. He set her down gently, his hands resting on her small shoulders. Not now, sweetheart. Grown-up talk. Sophia's face crumpled. Clara knelt, gathering her daughter close. Why don't you show Nana your fort? I'll be right there. After Sophia's footsteps faded down the hall, the silence thickened. Clara stood wiping her hands on her apron, her knuckles white. She already knew. The knowledge lived in her bones, the way he'd stopped calling her my love, the suitcase he'd left half-packed in the closet last weekend, the new cologne that smelled of jasmine and strangers. Valeria, she said quietly. Not a question. A recognition. Alexander flinched. It's not about her. Not really. Then what is it about? Her voice didn't break. It simply grew smaller, as if conserving energy for the storm ahead. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture frantic. I'm suffocating, Clara. This life, it's beautiful, it's perfect, but it's like living inside a snow globe someone else shook. I smile on cue, I come home on schedule, I play dragon on demand. But where am I in all of this? The real me? Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back. The real you held my hand through 3 miscarriages. The real you danced with me in this kitchen at 2 a.m. when we couldn't sleep. The real you cried when Sophia took her first steps. Her voice gained strength, trembling with truth. That man isn't suffocating. He's hiding, and he's using a glamorous distraction to avoid looking. In the mirror. Don't, he snapped, then softened instantly, ashamed. God, Clara, don't make me the villain. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I never learned how to love myself within this life we built. I need space. To discover who I am outside of being your husband, Sophia's father. Discover yourself? A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. You want to discover yourself by abandoning your 4-year-old daughter? By walking away from 12 years of shared history because a woman in a green dress told you your sadness was fascinating. She took a shaky breath. That's not discovery, Alex. That's escape. And it's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. I have to do this, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. For my own sanity. Your sanity? Clara's laugh was a broken thing. You think trading depth for glitter will heal you? You think Valeria wants the man who cries at dog commercials? She wants the billionaire. The name. The access. When that novelty wears off, and it will, you'll be standing alone in some penthouse with a woman who never knew your soul, wondering where the love went. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. I know your soul, Alexander. Every fractured piece of it. And I stayed. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Every single day. From the hallway, Sophia's small voice called out. Mommy? Is Daddy the dragon yet? The question hung between them, devastating in its innocence. Alexander's composure shattered. Tears streamed down his face as he looked toward the sound of his daughter's voice. A sound he was about to silence in her daily life. Oh, I'll still be in her life, he choked out. Visits. Weekends. I'll provide. Provide? Clara's eyes flashed with a fire he hadn't seen in months. She doesn't need your money, Alex. She needs her father. The one who knows she's afraid of the dark, but brave enough to check under the bed anyway. The one who lets her put stickers on his laptop. The one who... Her voice broke completely. The one who promised to always stay. He reached for his suitcase by the door, already packed, a fact that landed like a physical blow. I'll send lawyers tomorrow. To arrange everything. As he lifted the handle, Clara spoke one last time, her voice steady despite the devastation in her eyes. When you look in the mirror 5 years from now, Alexander, when the glamour has faded and the novelty has worn thin, I hope you can still recognize the man staring back. Because the man I married would never have walked out that door. He paused, his back to her, shoulders trembling. For one suspended second, Clara believed he might turn around, might drop the suitcase, might fall to his knees and beg forgiveness, might choose them. But he didn't. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the silent apartment. Clara stood frozen for 3 heartbeats before collapsing against the counter, her body racked with silent sobs. Down the hall, Sophia emerged from her blanket fort, crown still perched crookedly on her head. "Mommy," she whispered, her small face creased with confusion. "Where did the dragon go?" Clara knelt, gathering her daughter into arms that suddenly felt too fragile to hold anything precious. She pressed her lips to Sophia's hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence, the very essence of what Alexander had just abandoned. "The dragon had to fly away for a little while, my love," she whispered, the lye ash in her mouth. "But Mommy's here. Mommy's always here." As Sophia clung to her neck, Clara stared at the closed front door, the barrier between their old life and the terrifying unknown. And in that moment, she made a silent vow etched in grief and resolve. She would become both mother and father to this child. She would build a fortress of love so strong that no absence could ever make Sophia feel unloved again. But as rain streaked the windows like tears, polished surfaces that offered no warmth, no history, no fingerprints on the glass, Valeria entered the living room like a gust of wind, silk robe swirling, phone pressed to her ear, voice a practiced melody of dismissal. "Darling, I simply cannot wear last season's collection to the Met Gala. It would be social suicide." She ended the call with a flick of her wrist and turned to Alexander, who sat on a sofa that had never known the weight of a child's laughter. "You're quiet again. Just thinking." He stared at the park below, where families scattered like confetti across green lawns. A father lifted a little girl onto his shoulders. She threw her arms wide as if to embrace the sky. "About what?" Valeria settled beside him, not touching her perfume, still jasmine, though now layered with something sharper, filling the space between them. "The quarterly reports? That dreadful journalist who keeps asking about your personal life?" He turned to study her face, the flawless skin maintained by 3 dermatologists, the lips enhanced just enough to look naturally perfect, the eyes that had once seemed to see straight through him, but now reflected only surfaces. "Do you ever wonder what Sophia's doing right now?" The name hung in the air like a dropped glass. Valeria's smile tightened at the edges. "We agreed not to dwell on the past, Alexander. It's unhealthy. She'd be 9 years old now." His voice was barely a whisper. "She'd be in 4th grade. She loved dinosaurs last I heard, before the lawyers got involved." He swallowed hard. "I missed her entire childhood." "You made a choice," Valeria said, not unkindly but with the firmness of someone closing a door. "A necessary choice for your growth. Clara got the house, full custody, generous support payments. You fulfilled every obligation. Why torture yourself?" Obligation. The word ignited something raw in him. "She's my daughter, not an obligation." Valeria rose gracefully, crossing to the bar to pour 2 fingers of whiskey, his brand, though she never drank it herself. She returned and pressed the glass into his hand. "You're spiraling again. Remember what Dr. Evans said? You catastrophize when you dwell on what-ifs." He stared into the amber liquid. "I saw a girl today in the park. Same curly hair. Same way of tilting her head when she's concentrating. For 3 seconds, my heart stopped. I actually thought," his voice cracked, "I thought it was her. And it wasn't." Valeria's tone softened, but her eyes remained calculating. "Of course it wasn't. Clara made it clear she didn't want you disrupting Sophia's stability. You respected that. That was the mature decision." Was it mature? He finally looked at her, really looked, the first time in months. Or was it cowardice? Hiding behind lawyers and settlement agreements because facing Clara's disappointment was too painful. Valeria set her untouched glass down with a precise click. "I won't have this conversation again. Either you're present in our life together, or you're not. But you can't keep living in that other world, the one with the pancakes and the blanket forts and the simplicity." She said the last word like it was a disease. Was it so bad? The question escaped before he could cage it. "The pancakes? The blanket forts? Was that life truly so limiting that I had to burn it all down to feel alive?" The air turned to ice. Valeria's composure fractured for a single, revealing second. Her jaw tightened. Her knuckles whitened where she gripped the armrest. "You knew what you were leaving behind. You called it suffocating. You said Clara's devotion felt like a cage because she never challenged you to become more. I was lost." The confession tore from him, raw and ragged. "I was drowning in a success that meant nothing, and you offered me a life raft. But this," he gestured around the sterile room. This isn't a life raft. It's another kind of drowning. Just slower. More beautiful. Valeria stood abruptly, her robe whispering against marble floors. I refuse to be made the villain in your midlife crisis, Alexander. I didn't force you to leave your family. You came to me. You chose this. She paused at the doorway, her profile sharp against the city lights. And let's be honest, you didn't choose me for my soul. You chose me because I represented everything Clara wasn't. Exciting, unpredictable, desirable in a way that made you feel young again. Her laugh was brittle. Well, the novelty wears off. Even for billionaires. After she left the room, Alexander remained on the sofa as twilight bled into night. The park emptied. Lights flickered on in distant apartments. Warm, golden squares where families gathered for dinner, where children did homework at kitchen tables, where love lived in the mundane rituals he'd once dismissed as ordinary. He thought of Clara's hands, flour-dusted, steady, capable of creating entire worlds with crayons and cookie dough. He thought of Sophia's voice asking if he'd always stay. And he realized with devastating clarity that Valeria was right about one thing. He hadn't chosen her for depth. He'd chosen her as an escape hatch from a life he'd failed to appreciate until it was gone. The glamour had been the point. The glittering distraction from the quiet truth that he'd possessed something rare and had traded it for a reflection in a funhouse mirror. His phone buzzed on the glass table. A notification from the private investigator he'd hired months ago against his own better judgment. Sophia Vance, school play tonight, Oakwood Elementary, 6:30 p.m. His breath caught. He hadn't asked for updates in weeks, ashamed of his own weakness. Yet here was the information, delivered with clinical precision. Oakwood Elementary, 6:30. Tonight. He looked toward the bedroom where Valeria had disappeared, then back at the phone screen glowing with his daughter's name. For the first time in 5 years, the hollow space inside him didn't echo with emptiness. It pulsed with a terrifying, fragile hope. What would he do if he saw her? What would he say to the 9-year-old girl who still believed in syrup rivers and whipped cream clouds? Would she even recognize him? He stood slowly, his body heavy with the weight of 5 lost years. He walked to the window and pressed his palm against the cold glass, as if trying to bridge the distance between his gilded cage and the world below where real life continued without him. Somewhere out there, his daughter was preparing to step onto a stage in a cardboard costume. Probably nervous, probably brave. Somewhere out there, Clara was in the audience, her hands clasped tight with maternal pride. And here he stood, billionaire, visionary, architect of empires, trapped behind glass, watching life happen to other people. The true cost of his choice settled on his shoulders not as regret, but as a physical weight. The weight of every bedtime story missed, every scraped knee not kissed better, every whispered secret he'd never hear. The glamour hadn't saved him. It had merely provided a more expensive prison. He picked up his keys. Didn't know if he'd go to the school. Didn't know if he could. Bear to see what he'd destroyed, or if he deserved even a glimpse of the life he'd abandoned. But for the first time since walking out that door 5 years ago, Alexander Vance felt something other than numbness or restless hunger. He felt the sharp, clean pain of truth. And in that pain lived the first fragile seed of redemption. Not yet a choice, not yet action, but the dawning recognition that some treasures, once lost, could never be replaced by anything the world had to offer. The question hanging in the silent penthouse wasn't whether he would go to the school play tonight. It was whether he could survive seeing his daughter's face and knowing he was a stranger to her. And whether that pain might finally be enough to break him open, to shatter the man he'd become and make space for the father he might still learn to be. The city lights glittered below, indifferent to his crisis. But somewhere walls lined with framed children's artwork and a single professional photograph. Sophia at 4, grinning toothlessly on Alexander's shoulders at the zoo, both their faces alight with uncomplicated joy. Clara kept it not out of longing, but as proof to her daughter that love had once existed there. That the man who left wasn't a monster, just a lost soul who made a terrible choice. At 9 years old, Sophia moved through the house with the quiet confidence of a child who'd never doubted she was cherished. She sat cross-legged on the braided rug in the living room, carefully gluing sequins onto a cardboard triceratops costume while Clara ironed school blouses nearby. "Mommy." Sophia didn't look up from her craft. "Do you think real dinosaurs had sparkly skin?" Clara smiled, the iron hissing softly. "I think they probably had skin tougher than dragon scales. But sparkles are more fun for plays. Miss Anaya says imagination is more important than facts." Sophia carefully placed a silver sequin near the dinosaur's eye. She says that's why we have art class. She's a wise woman. Clara folded a blouse with practiced efficiency, her movements economical after years of stretching every dollar. The teaching salary barely covered the mortgage on this house, her grandmother's gift, but she'd never trade these creaky floorboards for Alexander's penthouse. Here, Sophia's laughter echoed in rooms filled with history, not emptiness. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Gable from next door stood holding a casserole dish wrapped in a checkered towel. "Brought you my famous tuna bake," she said, her voice warm as honey. "Figured you'd be too busy with play preparations to cook." Clara's eyes welled unexpectedly. "You didn't have to, Eleanor." "Nonsense." The elderly woman stepped inside, her gaze softening as she watched Sophia concentrate on her costume. "That child has your hands. Steady and kind." She lowered her voice. "And before you protest, I know about the dentist bill. Consider this payment for all those times you drove me to appointments after Harold passed." Clara squeezed her friend's hand, the gesture speaking volumes. This was her wealth now, not stock options or black cards, but casseroles delivered on hard days, neighbors who noticed when lights stayed on too late, a community that had become family when blood family failed them. Later, as Sophia practiced her lines in the hallway mirror, "I am Trixie the Triceratops, and I protect my herd." Clara sat at the kitchen table balancing the checkbook. The numbers never quite aligned. She'd taken on extra tutoring sessions after school, sold her paintings at weekend craft fairs, even taught pottery classes at the community center twice a week. Some months, she skipped her own dentist appointments to ensure Sophia had new shoes. But she never complained. Not to Sophia, not to friends, not even in the quiet solitude of 2 a.m. when she lay awake calculating bills. Because every sacrifice felt sacred when measured against the light in her daughter's eyes. "Mommy." Sophia appeared in the doorway, costume askew, one sequin dangling precariously. "Will Daddy come tonight?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Clara set down her pen, her heart aching with a familiar, dull throb. Alexander's child support payments arrived like clockwork, generous, impersonal deposits that felt more like guilt money than paternal love. He'd sent extravagant gifts on birthdays and holidays. Designer dresses Sophia never wore, a tablet she barely touched, a trip to Disney World Clara had gently declined. Knowing Sophia wasn't ready to spend a week with a stranger who shared her DNA, but not her memories. "He hasn't confirmed, sweetheart," Clara said gently, choosing truth over false hope. "But the important thing is that Mommy will be there. Front row, with the biggest sign." Sophia's shoulders slumped slightly, then straightened with resilient grace. "Okay, but if he comes, will you sit with him?" Clara's breath caught. She crossed the room and knelt before her daughter, cupping Sophia's face in her hands. "Listen to me carefully. No matter who sits where tonight, you are loved beyond measure. By me, by Mrs. Gable, by Miss Anaya, by everyone who knows your beautiful heart." Her thumb stroked Sophia's cheek. "Your daddy made a choice years ago that hurt us both. But his choices don't define your worth. Not ever." "I know," Sophia whispered, though her eyes glistened. "But I still wonder what he'd say about my costume." "Oh, my love." Clara pulled her close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "He'd say you're the most magnificent Triceratops he's ever seen. Because you are." As dusk settled over Maple Street, Clara helped Sophia into her costume. Cardboard plates carefully attached to her back, face painted with green and gold. In the hallway mirror, Sophia struck a pose, her small frame radiating courage. "Ready to protect your herd?" Clara asked, adjusting a crooked sequin. Sophia nodded solemnly. "Even if the T-Rex is scary." "Especially then," Clara whispered, kissing her forehead. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when your knees shake." They walked to Oakwood Elementary hand in hand, the autumn air crisp against their cheeks. The school auditorium buzzed with parents arranging themselves in folding chairs, programs rustling like anxious birds. Clara found their usual spot, front row, aisle seat, and unfolded the sign she'd made. "Go Trixie," in glittery letters Sophia had helped design. As other families settled around them, Clara noticed a man lingering near the back entrance. A tall figure in an expensive overcoat that seemed out of place among the practical parkas and worn sweaters of Oakwood parents. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be him. But the man turned, revealing a stranger's face, and her shoulders relaxed with a mixture of relief and quiet disappointment. Sophia squeezed her hand. It's okay, Mommy. We're enough. Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of awe at this child who'd learned compassion in the crucible of abandonment. We are more than enough, she corrected softly. We are everything. When the curtain rose and Sophia stepped into the spotlight, small but mighty in her cardboard armor, voice clear as she declared, I protect my herd. Clara's heart swelled until it threatened to burst. In that moment, she understood the profound truth she'd lived these 5 years. Love wasn't about grand gestures or financial security. It was about showing up, day after day, with tired hands and a full heart. It was about teaching a child that her worth wasn't tied to a father's presence or absence, that she was complete exactly as she was. As Sophia took her final bow, beaming at Clara with unrestrained joy, the audience erupted in applause. Clara stood, clapping until her palms stung, tears streaming freely down her face. And in that sea of celebrating families, she felt no lack, only abundance. The modest house waiting for them tonight, the casserole cooling on the counter, the bedtime story yet to be read. These were the real treasures. Not the glittering emptiness Alexander had chosen. But as she gathered her purse to meet Sophia backstage, Clara's gaze drifted once more to the back of the auditorium. And there, half hidden in shadow near the exit, stood a figure she'd know anywhere. Alexander. His face pale, his shoulders rigid, one hand pressed against the wall as if needing support. He hadn't come forward, hadn't taken a seat, had simply watched from the periphery like a ghost haunting his own life. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For 3 heartbeats, time stopped. She saw the devastation in his expression, the raw, unvarnished pain of witnessing what he'd thrown away. And in that silent exchange, Clara felt not anger or triumph, but a quiet, devastating pity. He'd come too late for the performance. Too late for bedtime stories and scraped knees and the 1,000 small moments that build a childhood. He'd come only for this polished fragment, a rehearsed line delivered under stage lights, and even that felt like trespassing. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, apology, acknowledgement, surrender, and melted back into the shadows before she could react. Clara turned toward the stage where Sophia waited, arms outstretched. She ran to her daughter, sweeping her into a hug that held 5 years of love, sacrifice, and quiet triumph. You were magnificent, she whispered into Sophia's ear. Sophia clung tightly. Did you see me protect the herd? I saw, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. And I'll never stop seeing you, my love. Not for a single second. As they walked home hand in hand beneath a sky dusted with early stars, Clara made a silent promise. Not to Alexander, not to the past, but to the future she'd built with her own 2 hands. She would continue showing up, continue loving fiercely, continue teaching Sophia that true strength wasn't in never breaking, but in mending yourself with gold, making the cracks part of your beauty. And if Alexander ever found the courage to step out of the shadows and into the messy, ordinary light of real fatherhood, she would welcome him, not for his sake, but for Sophia's. But she would never again mistake his presence for necessity. Because she'd already proven the most important truth of all. A mother's love could build a universe large enough to hold a child's entire world. And sometimes, laundry basket balanced on her hip, watching her daughter's tongue peek between concentrated lips as crayons scraped rhythmically across the page. Something in Sophia's posture, the slight slump of her shoulders, the way she kept erasing and redrawing the same figure, made Clara's maternal instinct hum with quiet concern. Whatcha creating, my love? She asked softly, setting the basket down and moving to kneel beside the desk. Sophia didn't look up immediately. Her small hand moved with deliberate care, coloring a tall figure in blue beside a smaller one in yellow, both standing beneath a lopsided house with a single window. Between them, she drew a dotted line, not connecting them, but stretching across empty space like a bridge made of longing. It's our family, Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara's breath caught. The drawing showed 3 figures. Sophia herself in yellow, Clara in green with long brown hair, and a tall blue figure with stick arms outstretched, but separated from them by that careful dotted line. Above the blue figure, Sophia had written in painstaking block letters, Daddy. Oh, sweetheart, Clara murmured, her throat tightening. She reached out, her finger hovering just above the paper without touching. This is beautiful. Sophia finally looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Miss Anaya said we should draw what makes us happy. But when I tried to draw us all together, my hand wouldn't do it right. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through freckles on her cheek. I kept drawing him too far away. Like he's on the other side of the room, even when he's in the picture. Clara gathered her daughter onto her lap, the crayons scattering across the rug. She held Sophia close, feeling the small tremors running through her body. The silent earthquake of a child trying to reconcile love with absence. "It's okay to miss him," Clara whispered into Sophia's hair, her own eyes burning. "Missing someone doesn't mean you're sad all the time. It just means love is still there, even when people aren't." "But why doesn't he want to be in the picture with us?" The question came out small and broken, the one Sophia had carried silently for 5 years. Did I do something wrong when I was little? Was I not a good enough daughter? Clara pulled back gently, cupping Sophia's face in her hands. She looked directly into those wide, wounded eyes, the same hazel shade as her own, but shadowed now with a confusion no child should know. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "You are the most wonderful daughter any parent could ever dream of. Your daddy leaving had absolutely nothing to do with you. Nothing. Not your laugh, not your dinosaur facts, not the way you share your cookies, none of it." She brushed Sophia's tears away with her thumbs. Sometimes grown-ups get lost inside themselves. They make choices that hurt people they love. Not because those people aren't lovable, but because the grown-up is hurting in ways they don't know how to fix. Sophia sniffled, leaning her forehead against Clara's. "Miss Anaya says my daddy is a famous businessman, that he builds computers that think." "He does," Clara acknowledged softly. "And he's very good at that. But being good at building things doesn't always mean someone knows how to build a happy heart. Your daddy, he got confused. He thought finding excitement in new places would make him feel whole. He didn't understand that wholeness was already waiting for him right here, with us. Is he ever coming back?" The question hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Clara chose her words with the care of a surgeon. "I don't know, my love. Some journeys take a very long time. But what I do know, what I will always know, is that you are complete exactly as you are. You don't need him to be here to be worthy of love. You are loved because you exist. Because you're Sophia." She kissed her daughter's temple. "And if he ever finds his way back to us, not as a visitor, but as a father who's ready to stay, that will be his gift to himself. Not because we need him to be whole, but because he'll finally understand what he walked away from." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this truth. Then she slipped from Clara's lap and returned to her drawing. With careful precision, she drew a small sun above the dotted line connecting the figures, not erasing the distance, but illuminating it. Below the drawing, in wobbly letters, she wrote, "I love you even when you're far away." Clara watched, tears streaming freely now, not tears of sadness, but of awe at her daughter's capacity for grace. This child, who had every right to bitterness, chose love instead. Chose to hold space for a father who hadn't earned that space, simply because her heart was too vast for resentment. That evening, after Sophia fell asleep clutching the drawing beneath her pillow, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Alexander's contact, a number she hadn't dialed in 5 years. She didn't call, but she typed a message, deleted it, typed again, her fingers trembling. Finally, she sent 3 simple sentences that cost her everything to write. "Sophia drew a picture today. She put you in it. She wrote that she loves you even when you're far away. Her heart is too big for the distance you created." She didn't expect a reply. Didn't want one, really. But she needed him to know, needed the universe to witness, that his daughter's love remained an open door, even as his absence carved canyons in her small world. This wasn't forgiveness. It was testimony, a record of what his choice had cost, delivered not with anger but with heartbreaking generosity. Hours later, as Clara washed dishes with methodical care, her phone buzzed once on the counter. A single word illuminated the screen. "Why?" She stared at the question, the water running over her hands until they grew pruny. Why tell him? Why risk reopening wounds? Why offer this man, who had chosen glamour over bedtime stories, who had traded blanket forts for black tie galas, a glimpse of the tenderness he'd abandoned? She dried her hands slowly, then typed her reply with deliberate calm. Because she deserves a father who knows what he's missing. Not for your sake. For hers. She set the phone face down without waiting for a response. The truth was, she didn't know if Alexander would ever truly see Sophia. Not as a possession to be won in court or a photo opportunity for his social media, but as a living, breathing child whose heart beat with a love fierce enough to span continents of absence. But that wasn't her burden to carry anymore. Her only job was to keep Sophia's heart soft while teaching her to build walls strong enough to protect that softness. To show her that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and that the most radical act of love sometimes means holding space for someone's return while refusing to shrink yourself waiting for them. Upstairs, Sophia stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about dinosaurs and dragons. Clara climbed the stairs quietly, pausing in the doorway to watch her daughter's chest rise and fall in the moonlight. She crossed the room and smoothed Sophia's hair back from her forehead, her touch feather-light. "I see you," Clara whispered into the darkness. "I see all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, the house on Maple Street held its breath, not with the tension of a life half-lived, but with the quiet certainty of love that had chosen to stay. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse of cold marble and colder truths, a billionaire stared at a text message on his phone, the words blurring as tears he hadn't earned fell onto a screen that reflected a face he barely recognized. The dotted line in Sophia's drawing stretched between them, not as a bridge yet, but as a challenge. A question hanging in the space between who he had been and who he might still become. And for the first time since walking out that door 5 years ago, Alexander Vance understood with devastating clarity that the greatest cost of his choice wasn't the life he'd left behind. It was the love that had remained, walked for hours past joggers and dog walkers, past lovers sharing benches and children chasing pigeons, feeling like a ghost haunting a world he no longer belonged to. And then he saw her, Sophia. She stood near the edge of the carousel platform, not riding, just watching, her small hands gripping the wrought iron railing, her face tilted up toward the spinning horses with an expression of quiet wonder. She wore a yellow raincoat despite the clear sky, the hood pushed back to reveal curls that had grown longer, darker, more like Clara's. At 9, she carried herself with a grace that was both familiar and foreign. The same tilt of the head when concentrating, the same way she bit her lower lip when thinking deeply. But there was a new stillness in her posture, a watchfulness in her eyes that hadn't been there at 4. Alexander's breath caught so violently he nearly doubled over. 5 years of imagining this moment, rehearsing apologies, planning grand gestures, and now his body betrayed him, locking in place 10 yards away as if crossing that distance would shatter the fragile reality before him. He watched, heart hammering against his ribs, as Sophia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook, scribbling something with intense concentration. A teacher? A school assignment? The thought that she might be here alone sent a jolt of panic through him. Then he saw Clara. She sat on a nearby bench, partially hidden by a flowering dogwood tree, grading papers with the focused calm that had once anchored his chaotic world. Even from this distance, he could see the lines around her eyes, the ones that came from laughter, not worry, and the way her hair caught the fading light, still that same warm chestnut despite the gray strands woven through it like threads of wisdom. She looked tired but peaceful, her presence radiating a quiet strength that made his sterile penthouse feel like a tomb. He should leave, turn around, walk away before they saw him. This wasn't his world anymore. He had no right to intrude on this sacred ordinary. The carousel visits, the homework sessions, the 1,000 small rituals that built a childhood. But his feet refused to move. He was transfixed by the sight of his daughter, alive and breathing and real in a way his memories couldn't capture. Sophia suddenly turned, her gaze sweeping the park, and for one terrifying second their eyes locked. Alexander's blood turned to ice. But she didn't recognize him. How could she? He was a stranger in an expensive coat, his face older, harder, stripped of the softness that used to appear when he held her. Her gaze passed over him without pause, returning to her notebook. He took a step closer, drawn by a force stronger than shame. Another step, until he stood just behind the dogwood tree, close enough to hear Clara's soft hum as she worked, close enough to catch the scent of Sophia's strawberry shampoo on the breeze. "And the blue horse is sad because he can't stop spinning," Sophia said suddenly, her voice clear as a bell in the quiet evening. "But the red horse says, you're not stuck. You're dancing." Clara looked up, smiling. "That's beautiful, my love. Where did you get that?" Sophia shrugged, still watching the carousel. "It just came to me. Like when I draw pictures of," she trailed off, her small shoulders lifting slightly. "Of what, sweetheart?" Clara's voice was gentle, practiced. Sophia hesitated, then whispered, "Of families who live in different houses. The words landed like stones in still water. Clara set down her papers, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind Sophia's ear. Some families do live in different houses, but they're still connected. Like stars in the same constellation, they look far apart from Earth, but they're actually part of the same story. Sophia considered this, her brow furrowed. Do you think constellations ever get lonely? Clara's hand stilled. Sometimes, but they keep shining anyway, because their light matters, even when no one's looking. Alexander's vision blurred. He pressed a hand against the rough bark of the tree to steady himself, his chest aching with a grief so profound it felt like dying. This was what he'd thrown away. Not just bedtime stories and school plays, but these quiet moments of wisdom passed between mother and daughter. These metaphors that taught resilience without breaking a child's spirit. Clara hadn't just raised Sophia. She'd armed her with poetry to survive absence. He watched as Sophia finally turned from the carousel and skipped toward the bench, her yellow raincoat flapping like wings. Can we get hot chocolate after this? With extra marshmallows? Only if you promise to eat your vegetables tonight, Clara teased, standing to gather her things. I promise. Cross my heart. Sophia made the gesture with solemn importance, then paused, her gaze drifting past Clara, to where Alexander stood frozen behind the tree. This time, she didn't look away. Her eyes widened slightly, studying his face with the intense curiosity of a child who sensed something important but couldn't name it. She tilted her head, the same way she had at 4 when trying to solve a puzzle. And for 3 heartbeats, Alexander felt the universe hold its breath. Then Clara followed her daughter's gaze. Their eyes met across the short distance, and the air crackled with 5 years of unsaid words. Clara's expression didn't harden with anger or soften with nostalgia. It simply settled into something unreadable, protective. She stepped slightly in front of Sophia, a subtle but unmistakable barrier. Alexander found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. I didn't mean to. I was just walking. Clara nodded slowly, her hand resting lightly on Sophia's shoulder. It's okay, she said, though her eyes remained guarded. To Sophia, she added gently, why don't you go choose which bench we'll sit on for hot chocolate? The one with the best view of the sunset. Sophia hesitated, her gaze flicking between them. Is he? He's just someone enjoying the park, sweetheart, Clara said smoothly. Go on. As Sophia walked away, casting one last curious glance over her shoulder, Clara turned fully to Alexander. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight weariness in her posture, but also the unshakable strength in her stance. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly, no malice in her tone, just fact. I know. His throat tightened. I saw her and I couldn't walk away. She's not a museum exhibit, Alexander. She's a child who deserves stability, not sightings. I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I just needed to see her. To know he gestured helplessly. She's so much like you. Clara's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She's her own person. Stronger than either of us realized. They stood in silence for a moment, the carousel music tinkling in the background like a ghost of happier times. Alexander watched Sophia skip ahead, her small form outlined against the golden sunset, and felt something break open inside him, a dam of denial finally giving way. I missed everything, he whispered, the words raw. First steps, first day of school, losing her first tooth. I traded all of it for. He shook his head, unable to finish. For what you thought would fill the emptiness, Clara finished softly. But it didn't, did it? He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had loved him through failures and triumphs, who had chosen to stay even when staying hurt. No, he admitted, the truth tasting like ash. It just made the emptiness louder. Clara studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if measuring how much of the man she'd loved still remained beneath the polished surface. If you truly want to know Sophia, she said finally, her voice low but firm, you don't do it from the shadows. You show up. Consistently. Patiently. Without expecting anything in return. You earn the right to be in her life, Alexander. Not because you share DNA, but because you prove you deserve her trust. Before he could respond, Sophia called out from down the path. Mommy, the sunset bench has a duck family on it. Clara gave Alexander one last look, a mixture of pity, warning, and something that might have been hope, then turned toward her daughter. Coming, my love. As they walked away hand in hand, Sophia glancing back once more with those curious hazel eyes, Alexander remained rooted to the spot, the carousel music fading into the gathering dusk. He pressed a hand to his chest, where the ache had transformed from hollow numbness to sharp, clean pain, the kind that meant healing might finally be possible. He had seen her, really seen her, not as a memory or a regret, but as a living, breathing child whose resilience shamed his cowardice. And in that seeing, he understood the true cost of his choice. Not the penthouse or the glamour or the freedom he'd craved, but the thousand small moments that build a human being. The very moments he'd missed while chasing a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The question wasn't whether he could win her back. It was whether he deserved to try. And for the first time in 5 years, Alexander Vance knew the answer would require more than money or charm or grand gestures. It would require showing up, day after day, in the messy, ordinary light of real fatherhood, without guarantees, without expectations, without the safety net of his fortune. It would require becoming the man his daughter's drawing had already imagined him to be. Not perfect, but present. Not distant, but devoted. As the last rays of sun disappeared behind the skyline, Alexander turned and walked in the opposite direction. Not toward his empty penthouse, but toward the uncertain path of redemption. The carousel kept spinning behind him, its painted horses forever chasing something just out of reach, unaware that the real magic entitled, how to explain his change of heart without making it about his guilt. But now that he faced the weathered blue door, words abandoned him. The house looked smaller than he remembered, yet somehow more substantial, its windows glowing with the warm light of a life built without him. Clara opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd sensed his presence through the floorboards. She wore paint-splattered jeans and an old sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no trace of the woman who once attended galas on his arm. Just Clara. Real. Present. Unimpressed. Alexander. Her voice was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "You're getting wet. I needed to see you." He shifted his weight, water dripping from his coat onto the welcome mat. The one Sophia had made in kindergarten, still bearing the faded letters. "Our house equals love." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, but not too far. Sophia's doing homework." He followed her into the living room, every detail hitting him like a physical blow. The same braided rug where Sophia used to build blanket forts, the bookshelf overflowing with well-loved paperbacks, the framed photo of mother and daughter at the beach. Sophia grinning with sand in her hair, Clara's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. This wasn't just a house. It was a museum of everything he'd discarded. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice rough, "about what you said at the park. About earning the right," he swallowed hard. "I'd like to start with supervised visits. An hour a week. Whatever you're comfortable with." Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe that led to the kitchen. "Why now? After 5 years of silence, except for birthday checks." "Because I saw her." The admission tore from him. "Really saw her. Not as my daughter, but as a person. And I realized I don't know her at all. I don't know what makes her laugh, or what scares her, or why she draws dotted lines between people in her pictures." His voice cracked. "I want to know those things, Clara. Not as a billionaire exercising visitation rights, but as her father trying to stitch myself back into her story." From the kitchen table, Sophia's voice floated in, clear as a bell. "Mommy, is that Daddy's voice?" Both adults froze. Clara closed her eyes briefly, then called back. "Just someone returning a library book, sweetheart. Keep working on your math." Alexander's heart shattered. She didn't even recognize his voice anymore. When Clara turned back to him, her eyes held a mixture of pity and resolve. "She's 9 years old, Alexander. For 5 of those years, you've been a name on a check and a face in old photos. Do you understand what it does to a child when the person who's supposed to be their safe place becomes a stranger?" She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Supervised visits aren't about your guilt. They're about her stability. And right now, introducing you, even supervised, would disrupt the peace we've built. She's finally stopped asking why you left. She's finally sleeping through the night without nightmares about being forgotten." "I wouldn't disrupt anything," he insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. "I'd follow your rules completely. Your money can't fix this," Clara cut in gently but firmly. "You can't buy your way back into her trust with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Trust is built in the quiet moments, in showing up when it's inconvenient, in remembering she hates mushrooms but loves extra cheese on her pizza, in being there when she fails her math test and needs someone to tell her it's okay to try again." She looked toward the kitchen, her expression softening. I've been that person for 5 years. And she's finally okay. I won't risk unraveling that because you've suddenly decided you want to be part of her life. The truth of her words landed like stones in his chest. He'd come here expecting resistance, but not this quiet devastation. The understanding that his absence had carved canyons in his daughter's heart that couldn't be filled with apologies or alimony payments. What if I'm different now? He asked, the question raw. What if I finally understood what I threw away? Clara's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. Actions speak louder than realizations, Alexander. Show me you've changed, not with words, but with consistency. Start by respecting her need for stability. Start by understanding that your desire to reconnect isn't more important than her right to feel safe. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And maybe start by asking yourself why you really want this. Is it for her? Or is it to ease your own guilt? Before he could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, math worksheet in hand. She stopped short when she saw Alexander, her eyes widening with recognition this time, not of his face, but of his presence. You are Daddy, she said simply, no accusation in her tone, just observation. Alexander's breath caught. Yes, I am. Sophia studied him with the intense curiosity of a scientist examining a rare specimen. You look older than in the pictures. I am, he managed. 5 years older. She nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at Clara. Can he help me with problem 7? It's about fractions, and I don't get why the pieces have to be equal. Clara's eyes flicked to Alexander, a silent warning in their depths. Don't mess this up. Alexander knelt slowly, bringing himself to Sophia's eye level. May I see the problem? She hesitated, then stepped forward, holding out the worksheet. Her small fingers brushed his as she handed it over. A contact so brief it lasted less than a second, yet it sent an electric jolt through him. This was his daughter. Flesh and blood and curiosity and courage. He pointed to the diagram of a pie divided unevenly. See this? The pieces aren't equal, so we can't call them thirds or quarters. Fractions only work when the whole is divided fairly. He kept his voice gentle, patient, the way he'd once explained cloud formations to her at 4. Just like families. Sometimes people think love has to be divided equally between everyone, but real love multiplies. It doesn't get smaller when shared. Sophia considered this, her brow furrowed. So even if someone lives in a different house, they can still have all the love? Yes, Alexander whispered, his throat tight. All of it. Clara watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. When Sophia returned to her math problems with renewed focus, Alexander rose slowly, his knees protesting the movement. I should go, he said quietly. Clara walked him to the door. On the porch, rain falling softly around them, she spoke without looking at him. She asked about you last night. Why you left? I told her the truth, that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love, not because those people aren't worthy, but because the grown-up is lost. Alexander stared at the wet pavement. What did she say? She said, Then I hope Daddy finds his way home soon. Clara finally met his eyes, hers glistening with unshed tears. But home isn't a place, Alexander. It's a choice. And she's already home with me. He nodded, the truth settling heavily on his shoulders. I'll respect your boundaries. No more unannounced visits. Good. She paused, then added softly. But if you're serious about this, write her a letter. Not about you. About her. Tell her you noticed something specific. Her kindness to the new girl in class. Her persistence with piano practice. Show her you see her, not just your regret. As he walked down the porch steps into the rain, Alexander felt something shift inside him. Not hope, not yet, but purpose. He wouldn't fight for custody with lawyers and courtrooms. He'd fight for her trust with patience and presence. One letter at a time. One honest observation at a time. One proof that he saw her, not as a reflection of his failures, but as the magnificent person she'd become despite them. Behind him, the blue door closed softly, sealing him out of the warm light. But for the first time since walking away 5 years ago, Alexander Vance didn't feel like a ghost haunting his past. He felt like a man finally learning how to live in the regrets. He mentioned the oak tree she'd climbed at school, according to the private investigator's discreet reports. Her science project about monarch butterflies, the way she always shared her lunch with Liam Chun when he forgot his. Each letter was mailed without expectation, each one a stone dropped into a silent well. But the silence from Maple Street grew louder than any rejection. No replies came. No acknowledgement that the letters were even received. And Valeria's patience wore thinner by the day. "You're obsessing," she snapped one evening, watching him reread Sophia's school newsletter for the third time. "It's been 5 years, Alexander. She has a life. You have a life with me." "I'm trying to build something real," he said quietly, not looking up from the photo of Sophia's class trip to the aquarium. Her face alight with wonder beside a massive jellyfish tank. "Real." Valeria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You think showing up now with handwritten notes makes you noble? It makes you desperate. And desperation is ugly on billionaires." Her words struck deeper than she knew. Because beneath his disciplined outreach lay a truth he couldn't voice. He was terrified that Clara was right, that his desire to reconnect was more about easing his guilt than loving Sophia for who she'd become. The doubt festered until it curdled into something darker: resentment. Resentment that Clara held all the power. Resentment that Sophia's trust wasn't his by right. Resentment that the life he'd discarded had flourished without him while his glittering world felt emptier by the day. The breaking point came during a charity gala where Valeria introduced him to a tech investor who gushed. "Your daughter's school play went viral in parenting circles." Such poise for 9 years old. Alexander had stood frozen, champagne flute trembling in his hand, realizing he'd missed yet another milestone. This one celebrated by strangers while he'd been debating font choices for his latest letter. That night, staring at the Manhattan skyline from his sterile bedroom, Alexander made a decision that would fracture everything anew. If patience and letters couldn't bridge the distance Clara had built, perhaps the law could. His resources weren't just financial, they were institutional. He could afford the best family attorneys in the city, experts who specialized in reunification cases involving high-net-worth individuals. He told himself it wasn't about winning. It was about ensuring Sophia had access to both parents, about correcting an imbalance that had left her with only half a family. 2 days later, over breakfast in a downtown cafe far from prying eyes, his attorney laid out the strategy. "We file for joint legal custody first," Marcus Reed explained, stirring honey into his tea with precise movements. "Focus on educational and medical decisions. Then we build toward physical custody sharing, alternating weekends, extended summer visits. The court favors maintaining relationships with both parents unless there's evidence of harm." "There's no harm," Alexander said quickly. "Clara's an excellent mother." "Exactly." Marcus smiled thinly. "Which makes this cleaner. We position you not as a deadbeat dad seeking redemption, but as a responsible father who temporarily lost his way and is now committed to active co-parenting. Judges eat that up." Alexander stared into his black coffee, seeing Sophia's face in the dark liquid. "She's happy. Stable. What if this disrupts that?" "The disruption is temporary," Marcus assured him. "And frankly, Mr. Vance, your daughter deserves access to your resources. The elite schools, the travel opportunities, the cultural exposure. A public school teacher's salary can only provide so much." The words landed like poison coated in gold. Alexander wanted to argue that Clara provided something money couldn't buy: constancy, emotional safety, unconditional love. But the attorney's logic slithered into his doubts. Wasn't it selfish to deny Sophia the advantages his wealth could offer? Didn't she deserve both worlds? The warmth of Maple Street and the opportunities of his empire? He signed the retainer agreement with a hand that didn't tremble. The official notice arrived on a Tuesday afternoon wrapped in manila paper that felt heavier than lead. Clara sat at her kitchen table long after Sophia had gone to her room to practice piano, the legal documents spread before her like a battlefield map. Her hands remained steady as she read each clause, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Petition for modification of custody order. Joint legal custody. Best interests of the child. She'd known this might come. Had prepared for it in quiet moments during pottery class, during late-night grading sessions, during every supervised phone call where Alexander's voice grew more confident, more entitled. But seeing it in black and white, his name printed formally above demands for shared decision-making, felt like a violation. Not of legal rights, but of trust. After their conversation on the porch, after her careful guidance about letters and patience, he'd chosen the nuclear option. That evening, as Sophia colored at the kitchen table, humming a tune from her latest music lesson, Clara made a decision of her own. She wouldn't fight with bitterness or accusations. She'd fight with truth, with evidence of the life they'd built, The report cards showing Sophia's academic growth, the therapist's notes confirming her emotional stability, the letters from teachers praising her kindness and resilience. Most importantly, she'd ensure Sophia's voice was heard, not as a pawn, but as a person with valid feelings about the father who'd abandoned her. When Sophia looked up from her drawing, a detailed sketch of their house with home, written in bold letters across the roof, Clara asked gently, "Sweetheart, do you remember when Daddy visited a few weeks ago?" Sophia's crayon stilled. "Yes. He helped with fractions. Would you like to see him more often? Maybe on weekends." Sophia considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't know. He feels far away still, like when you try to hug someone through a window." She looked up, her hazel eyes searching Clara's face. "Is he coming back for real this time?" Clara's heart broke anew. "I don't know, my love. But whatever happens, you get to decide how much space he takes up in your heart. Not lawyers. Not judges. You." 2 days later, Alexander stood outside the family court mediation center, adjusting his tie with hands that finally betrayed his nerves. Through the glass doors, he saw Clara approaching from the opposite direction, Sophia's small hand clasped firmly in hers. His daughter wore a yellow dress, the same color as her raincoat at the carousel, and carried a notebook clutched to her chest like armor. Their eyes met across the lobby. Clara's expression was unreadable, but Sophia's widened with surprise, then confusion. She tugged her mother's hand, whispering something Alexander couldn't hear. As they entered the mediation room together, the air thickened with unspoken history. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Heiress, gestured to the circle of chairs. "Please sit wherever feels comfortable." Clara chose a chair near the window, pulling Sophia onto her lap despite the girl's protests that she was too big for that. Alexander sat opposite them, close enough to see the freckles dusting Sophia's nose, far enough to respect the invisible boundary between them. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Ellis began gently, "your petition requests joint legal custody and eventual shared physical custody. Can you share what's motivating this change after 5 years of minimal involvement?" Alexander cleared his throat, his carefully rehearsed speech dissolving under Sophia's watchful gaze. I want to be part of her life. Properly. Not just financially, but emotionally. I've realized how much I've missed, and I'm committed to showing up consistently." Clara spoke next, her voice calm but firm. "Sophia has thrived in a stable, predictable environment for 5 years. Introducing sudden changes, especially court-ordered ones, could undermine that stability. She's only just stopped having nightmares about being forgotten." From her mother's lap, Sophia piped up, "I don't have nightmares anymore. Except sometimes about math tests." The room softened slightly at her honesty. Dr. Ellis smiled. "What would you like, Sophia?" "About spending time with your dad." All eyes turned to her. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, then opened her notebook to a fresh page. With careful precision, she drew 2 houses side by side. In one, she wrote "Mommy plus me." In the other, Daddy. Between them, she drew a dotted line, just like in her earlier family picture. But this time, she added small footprints along the path. "I want him to visit sometimes," she said softly, not looking up from her drawing. "But I don't want to live in 2 places. My room is here. My friends are here. My piano is here." She finally met Alexander's eyes, her gaze steady beyond her years. "If you want to be in my life, you have to come to me. Not make me go to you." The words landed like a verdict. Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. Not because he disagreed, but because he'd never considered that his vision of shared custody might feel like displacement to her. He'd imagined weekend trips to his penthouse, summer vacations in the Hamptons, elite camps, all the things his money could buy. But Sophia wasn't asking for experiences. She was asking for presence within the life she already loved. "I can do that," he heard himself say, the words raw with sincerity. "I'll come to you. Every week. For as long as you'll have me." Clara studied him, her expression unreadable. But in that moment, as Sophia closed her notebook with a decisive snap, Alexander understood the true battlefield wasn't in courtrooms or custody agreements. It was here, in the quiet space between a child's honest request and a father's willingness to humble himself wordplay. Tickets to the planetarium's new exhibit on constellations, a handcrafted globe that spun silently on its axis. Clara came in paint-splattered jeans and cardigans, her arms full of binders documenting Sophia's life. Report cards showing steady academic growth, therapist notes confirming emotional resilience, letters from teachers praising her kindness to classmates. In the sterile conference room with its beige walls and uncomfortable chairs, their differences played out like a silent duel. Alexander spoke of opportunities: private schools with small class sizes, summer programs in Switzerland, access to museums and symphonies that would expand her horizons. Clara countered with stability. The neighborhood school where Sophia knew every teacher by name, weekend pottery classes with Mrs. Gable next door, bedtime stories that ended with, "I'll always be here." "You're offering her a gilded cage," Clara said during one particularly tense session, her voice low but fierce. "All those experiences mean nothing if she doesn't feel safe enough to enjoy them." "I'm offering her options you can't provide," Alexander shot back, frustration finally cracking his polished facade. "Do you really think Oakwood Elementary prepares her for the real world?" From her seat between them, Sophia, who'd been quietly sketching in her notebook, looked up, her pencil hovering mid-stroke. "My school has a garden," she said softly. "We grow tomatoes and give them to the food bank. Is that not the real world?" The room fell silent. Alexander stared at his daughter, seeing for the first time how his vision of better had blinded him to the richness of what already existed. He'd been so focused on what Clara's world lacked, prestige, wealth, connections, that he'd failed to see what it offered: purpose, community, roots. Later that evening, as rain tapped against his penthouse windows, Alexander replayed Sophia's words like a mantra. Is that not the real world? He thought of his own childhood. Boarding schools that taught him Latin but not how to trust, boardrooms that rewarded cunning over kindness, a life built on transactions rather than connection. What if Clara hadn't limited Sophia's world? What if she'd protected it? The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't fighting for Sophia's best interests. He was fighting to prove he hadn't made a mistake 5 years ago, to validate his choice to leave by demonstrating that his world was superior. And in doing so, he was repeating the same error, valuing appearances over substance, glamour over grace. The next mediation session began differently. Alexander arrived without his briefcase, wearing a simple sweater instead of a suit. When Dr. Ellis asked about his proposed visitation schedule, he didn't mention weekend trips or summer camps. "I'd like to start with Sunday afternoons," he said, his gaze fixed on Sophia rather than Clara. "Here, at the house on Maple Street. I'll bring groceries and help make dinner. Maybe we could watch that documentary about octopuses she mentioned last week." He paused, his voice thickening. "I don't need to take her anywhere. I just need to be there." Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she remained guarded. "Why the change?" "Because I finally understood something," Alexander admitted, the words raw. "I've been trying to give her my world when what she needs is me and hers." He looked at Sophia, who was watching him with those unervingly perceptive eyes. "You don't need my penthouse. You need your dad to show up for spaghetti night and help with math homework, and remember that you're scared of thunderstorms, but brave enough to check under the bed anyway." Sophia's lips curved into the faintest smile, the first genuine one he'd seen directed at him. She closed her notebook and slid off Clara's lap, walking slowly to the window where rain streaked the glass. "Last week it stormed," she said without turning around. "I counted to 37 before calling for Mommy. Last year I only made it to 12. Alexander's throat tightened. "That's incredible bravery." She finally turned, her expression serious beyond her years. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about knowing someone will come when you call." Her gaze held his, steady and searching. "Will you come if I call?" The question hung in the air, fragile as a soap bubble. This wasn't about custody arrangements or legal rights. This was about trust, the most precious currency in a child's world, and one he'd bankrupted 5 years ago. "I will," he promised, his voice barely above a whisper. Every single time. Clara watched this exchange, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, but something in her posture softened. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but perhaps the first crack in the wall she'd built to protect her daughter. Dr. Ellis cleared her throat gently. "This is progress, but we still need to address decision-making authority. Medical choices, educational paths. I'll defer to Clara on most things," Alexander interrupted, surprising even himself. "She knows Sophia better than anyone. I want a voice. Not control. Just a voice in the conversations that matter." Clara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "If you're serious about being present rather than possessive, we can work with that." As they left the mediation center together, Sophia walking between them, Not holding either hand, but close enough to touch, Alexander felt something shift inside him. The hunger that had driven him for years, the restless need to prove himself, to acquire more, to be seen, finally quieted. Not because he'd won, but because he'd stopped fighting the wrong battle. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, he opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his legal team. Withdraw the petition for shared physical custody. Focus instead on establishing consistent, supervised visitation at Clara's residence. He deleted the draft 3 times before finally sending it, each keystroke feeling like shedding a layer of armor he no longer needed. Outside, the city glittered with false promises of fulfillment. But for the first time in years, Alexander Vance felt rich. Not because of what he owned, but because of what he was finally learning to give. His presence, unadorned and unentitled, offered not as a transaction but as a gift. And somewhere on Maple Street, a 9-year-old girl added a new page to her notebook. Not a drawing of houses or dotted lines, but a single sentence written in careful block letters. Daddy stayed something in his voice, the raw, unvarnished regret, had finally convinced her to meet. You look like hell, she said bluntly, stirring honey into her tea with precise, angry movements. Good. I deserve worse, Alexander replied quietly, his hands wrapped around a cooling mug of black coffee. I know that. Elena studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp as broken glass. Clara never told you what really happened, did she? His breath caught. About what? About why Valeria encouraged you to leave. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. It wasn't because she saw your sadness or wanted to free you. It was because she heard a rumor from someone at your office that Clara was having an affair. A stupid, baseless rumor started by some jealous assistant who resented how happy you two seemed. Alexander's blood turned to ice. What? It spread like wildfire at that charity gala where you met Valeria, Elena continued, her voice trembling with old anger. Someone whispered it to her over champagne. How your perfect wife was sleeping with her pottery instructor while you were closing deals in Tokyo. Valeria didn't confront you because she wanted the truth. She saw an opportunity. A billionaire doubting his wife's loyalty? Easy prey. She shook her head, disgust curling her lip. She fed your insecurities, Alexander. Told you Clara's devotion was suffocating because she knew that's what you were afraid of. That someone could love you that completely and you wouldn't be enough to keep it. The room tilted. Alexander gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Memories flooded back. Valeria's carefully timed comments about Clara's predictability. Her suggestion that his marriage felt like a cage. The way she'd framed his departure as necessary for growth. All of it built on a lie. A malicious, fabricated lie. But Clara would have told me if there were rumors, he choked out. She would have, she knew, Elena cut in softly. She found out about the rumor a week before you left. Someone warned her it was circulating. But when she tried to talk to you, you were already distant, already pulling away. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Do you know what she did? Instead of defending herself, instead of throwing accusations. Back at you, she stayed silent. Because she thought if you believed the worst of her, it meant you were already gone. And she didn't want to destroy what little self-worth you had left by forcing a confrontation you weren't ready for. Alexander's vision blurred. He remembered Clara's words the night he left. The man I married would never have walked out that door. She'd known. She'd known he was operating on lies, and she'd chosen to protect his fragile ego rather than fight for herself. Why are you telling me this now? He whispered, the question raw. Because I watched my best friend break into pieces that night you left, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. I held her while she sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe, wondering what she'd done wrong. And all the while, she refused to speak ill of you. Even when Sophia asked why Daddy left, Clara told her it was because he was lost, not because he was cruel. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. You've been punishing yourself for leaving, Alexander. But you've also been punishing Clara for something she never did. It's time to see the truth, not just about Valeria's manipulation, but about Clara's loyalty. She didn't just stay because she loved you. She stayed because she loved you enough to let you go without making you feel like a monster. As Elena stood to leave, she placed a folded napkin on the table. On it, in Clara's familiar looping handwriting, was a quote Alexander recognized from their early days. Love is not about possession. It's about giving someone the freedom to be who they need to be, even if that means walking away. He stared at the words, his chest aching with a grief so profound it felt like dying. All these years, he'd believed Clara's silence was weakness. But it had been the ultimate act of strength, the kind of love that chooses grace over vengeance, dignity over drama. While he'd been chasing validation in Valeria's arms, Clara had been building a fortress of resilience for their daughter, brick by quiet brick. Later that evening, standing outside Valeria's penthouse, the same one he'd moved into 5 years ago, he felt none of the anticipation that used to accompany these visits. When she opened the door in a silk robe, her smile faltered at the devastation in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with practiced concern. "I know about the rumor," he said flatly, the words hanging between them like shattered glass. Valeria's composure cracked for a single, revealing second, her eyes widening, her hand flying to her throat. Then the mask snapped back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about. The affair rumor. The one you heard at the gala. The one you used to convince me my marriage was a cage." He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you ever check if it was true? Or did you just assume a woman like Clara, devoted, patient, real, must be hiding something?" Valeria's laugh was brittle. "Even if I did hear something, it doesn't matter. You wanted to leave, Alexander. I just gave you permission." "No," he corrected softly. "You weaponized my insecurities. You saw a man drowning in success and offered him a life raft made of lies." He looked around the penthouse, the cold marble, the art purchased for investment value, the bed where they'd shared bodies but never souls. "This was never about love. It was about conquest. And I was foolish enough to think your attention meant I was finally seen." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. "You'll go running back to her now, won't you?" Valeria's tone was venomous. "The saintly Clara who forgives everything. But she'll never trust you again, Alexander. You burned that bridge too thoroughly." "Maybe not," he admitted, his hand on the doorknob. "But I owe her the truth. And I owe myself the chance to become someone worthy of forgiveness, even if I never receive it." As he stepped into the elevator, Alexander felt the last vestiges of his old life fall away. The glamour, the validation, the illusion of control, all of it built on a foundation of sand. What remained was raw and terrifying. The truth of his betrayal, the depth of Clara's loyalty, and the monumental task of earning back even a fraction of what he'd destroyed. But for the first time, he wasn't running toward something. He was walking back, slowly, humbly, carrying the weight of his mistakes like stones in his pockets. And somewhere on Maple Street, a woman who had loved him through failures and triumphs was tucking her daughter into bed, unaware that the man who broke her heart was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust once shattered doesn't reassemble neatly. But as the elevator descended toward the street level, albums from their early years, his college diploma, a few books he'd never read but pretended to love. She'd been clear on the phone. "Come during Sophia's piano lesson. We'll keep this brief." He arrived precisely at 4 p.m., the hour when the neighborhood hummed with children returning from school and parents starting dinner. The familiar scent of rosemary and baking bread wafted through the screen door as he knocked, a ghost of the life he'd abandoned. Clara opened it wearing paint-splattered overalls, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no trace of the woman who once attended galas on his arm. Just Clara. Real. Present. Unimpressed. "Thanks for coming," she said neutrally, stepping aside to let him in. "Everything's in the study." He followed her down the hallway, every step echoing.